Welcome, everyone, on behalf of IES Alumni Engagement and Advancement to our Globalization is Accelerating event. We are so excited that you could join us. We have many time zones represented in our audience today, and we are so appreciative of your including us in your day. I am privileged to have the opportunity to introduce our panel moderator for our event today, Kyle Hegarty, who is a Vienna 98 alumnus, and he has developed a career through the years which helps organizations to grow globally. His sales and marketing training programs help to strengthen teams, increase business across regions, and his global communication programs helps to strengthen teams, build trust, and prepare next generation leaders for tomorrow's threats and opportunities. In 2006, Kyle moved to Singapore to open a marketing agency where he built a team across 7 countries. His first book, The Accidental Business Nomad, a survival guide for working across a shrinking planet, is filled with successes and failures of growing businesses overseas. It's an incredible book with great stories. I recommend you picking it up and giving it a quick read. And how anyone can learn to communicate better globally. It is available in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook formats. Please join me in welcoming Kyle Hegarty.
Thank you so much, Jody. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm actually more excited to hear from the panelists than anything else, so I'll probably do a quick intro here. But as Jody had said, I have recently published this book. Basically, the argument that I'm making is that organizations and companies have gone global, but people still have not. And probably my first big overseas experience, like many, was IES, where I was in Vienna. And I think that probably gave me the bug, the travel bug and the living bug. And a couple of years later, with itchy feet, I ended up moving over here to Asia. So I ended up going through a bunch of business experiences, both positive and negative. And I put this book together. And I think that we're in a really interesting time right now because this is arguably, a recession, some weird downturn. I wrote my story based off of what happened after the last downturn, the 2008, 2009. And one of the interesting things that's happened in recent downturns is that companies traditionally would look inward and almost consolidate and think about protecting just their local market. The last 2 downturns have been different because technology has changed, because markets are more open. Companies actually are going global faster in downturns. And we saw this in the 2008, 2009, where a lot of companies actually put more of their effort overseas because that's where the growth was coming from. And it's too early to tell right now, but it does seem as many of the countries here in Southeast Asia, Singapore, South Korea, China, are starting to open up. We're getting a lot of momentum here. There seems to be a lot of buzz about growth, and a lot of that is coming from other foreign markets and foreign companies that are trying to expand. So I know that the buzz, the noise out there is about protectionism. There's a lot of gloom and doom, but I think if you look behind some of those headlines and some of the media screaming that's out there, I think that might be in a bit of a global upturn in terms of opportunities. The trick will be to figure it out, find them, and then hopefully be able to use the experience that we've had from like IES and from other places to be able to work in global environments more effectively. And that's what I'm focused on. So I'll stop talking here and I'll actually start introducing the rest of our panelists, and I'll go one at a time. First up, we have Greg Morley. He is currently based in Hong Kong, I believe. Where are you, Greg? There you are. He is the Regional Director, Human Resources for Asia, Oceania for Moet Hennessy. If I pronounce any of this stuff wrong, forgive me.
Everything's perfect so far.
All right. Division of LVMH. Definitely, if you ever have any free samples, to send them to Singapore. Leading HR function for the company's operations across the region. He does serve as the global leader for Hennessy's strategies to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion across the organization. That's all very exciting to me. Very exciting for my kids is that before he was there, he was a HR leader over at Hasbro, as well as Disney. And you were doing stuff in Disney across the world. And every person in or ex-Disney, they always tell me that they have a little bit of mouse blood running through their veins. So I'm curious if that's something that you've experienced or still have. Then what I'll do is I'll list out the panelists, and then we'll turn it over to each of them to introduce themselves in a little bit more detail. All right. Next up, we have Faye Sahai. She was in IES Freiburg in 1987. This will be interesting. I have some good questions, and I'm looking forward to this. So you do a ton of stuff. You're a partner at Morley SV Global Advising. You're advising global corporations on innovation and the managing director of Vinage Ventures, investing in digital health. Good idea. Startups with Telocity.co fund. You've got this list of stuff that you're doing. I don't know how you do all of this stuff at the same time. It would take me an hour to get through your resume here, but I'm definitely interested in talking about what global innovation is to you and your teammates and how you're working with companies on that. So we'll get into that. And then we've got Brynn, who probably has the best background of all of us today, where she's Brynn Campbell, IES Amsterdam. From 2016. She graduated in 2017, and I'm also interested in her story about how she ended up back in the Netherlands, in The Hague now, where you moved to the Netherlands to pursue her passion for victim advocacy. She now works for the office manager with an international nonprofit called the Dennis. You're going to have to pronounce this one for me. I'm not even going to try. You're focused on HR, administration, finances, IT. You're doing everything for this nonprofit. So we're going to have to understand more detail how you got there and what you're up to. And then finally, last but not least, we've got Debbie Schuler from Durham, IES, 73, 74. Debbie, you're living the semi-retired life at the beach. I think that you've got that figured out. During your 33 years career in international finance, you have done business dealings in 6 of the 7 continents. We could all maybe guess at that one that you just didn't get that banking deal. You lived in 3 continents. You're a banker. You've been in Bank of America, Continental Bank, tons of banks. You've been doing all this stuff. You've lived in, Singapore, right? You were in New York, Hong Kong, Singapore, and now you are, I believe, in Florida, correct? All right, in Florida. Welcome to everybody, all of these panelists. Hopefully I haven't butchered too much of these intros. I'm going to let you recover and explain yourselves properly now. We'll go back to Greg. Greg, would you mind just introducing yourself and just giving a little bit more context to what you're up to these days?
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. You did a pretty good job, so I don't need to add on too much more. One of the things that we have as a standard in our company is when people are on Zoom, we try to get to see their faces. So if any of you brave IES alumni are willing to turn your camera on, that would be wonderful. What we do, what I've been doing for the last almost 20 years is working abroad, but for international companies and for a long time with US companies. So I always had a great drawback to my home. But one of the things I've been fortunate to have had as part of my experience over the last probably 10 years is I get back to London quite frequently. And I never get back to London without walking through Bloomsbury Square, which is where IES was located at the time, and bringing myself back to that time in my life, which was so important to me in really shaping my aspiration to live and work abroad. And I think the experience I had, and probably all of us had in IES, had that kind of impact on us. And even today, I think back to that time. So I'm very fortunate to have a role which is partly regional in Asia Pacific and partly global with diversity, equity, and inclusion. At this point in my career, I'm really focused on trying to make a difference for people, not only in our organization, but outside our organization. So very fortunate to be part of this. And I will pass this on to Faye, who was also a 1987 graduate, which is pretty cool.
I know, Greg, and we stopped in London right before we went over, so I think we might have met, or I guess we were going in the same time. So just to add a little bit more from what I've been doing is I've actually been working on innovation and kind of transformation that's been happening with global companies. So I'm working a lot with some European, but mostly Asian countries, really on how are they transforming themselves for the future? How is technology going to disrupt them? How can they be closer and more engaged with their customers, especially in the InsurTech area has been a focus. And then I've also been investing in digital health and talking to several venture capital and startups globally as well. So there's so much happening globally. It's so exciting. But to Greg's point, it really started off in kind of Freiburg when I studied abroad during college. And it was that sense of freedom, learning, constantly immersing yourself in a different culture, school, people, that got me just really excited to really keep exploring in that area. So I love working with international teams. And I also run on an innovation executive forum that has about 200 representatives from all different companies and different global representation of what's happening in innovation and corporate venture investment. So happy to talk and looking forward to our panel today. I'm going to turn it over to Brynn.
Thanks, Faye, and thanks, Kyle, for the introduction. Indeed, I just studied abroad 4 years ago, so I'm still very early in my career and maybe have been as much focused on beginning my career as I have been on beginning my life. So I can say that when I studied abroad in Amsterdam 4 years ago, and I do see Floor is here in this meeting, I have to give a shout out to Floor because she led my program and she was really incredible. Her and her colleagues at IES Amsterdam were helpful to me both before I returned to the Netherlands and once I had arrived here. So I'm actually living still in Amsterdam, not too far from the IES Center. And in the beginning, I was actually even going there to work on my visa applications and emailing them some of my questions, and they were a huge networking support to me as well. So I was studying criminal justice at my Minnesota university, and I got to do an international criminology and law program here in Amsterdam. And it was my first introduction to the Hague, which is this hub of international justice. And it's much more alternative forms of justice because, of course, justice in the typical justice system is handled by country. And I was introduced to this hub of the world where there are alternative mechanisms to justice. And I was so fascinated by it because that's not something you learn in American criminal justice. And I just knew I had to come back and try to get my foot in the door in that field. So I'm very happy to be working at an international nonprofit now, which it has a focus on supporting survivors of sexual violence in war. And it's just been an incredible learning experience to get to engage with projects that are happening in multiple countries, in a team of people who are from multiple countries while I'm living in a new country. It's just been, I really have this wide angle lens as a perspective on life. And I owe it all to my IES experience in Amsterdam. Before I studied abroad, I told myself I would spend the rest of my life in Minnesota. And here I am in The Hague. So that's me, and I'll pass it off to Debbie.
Hi, everybody. As they said, right now I am retired and live in Florida. I keep busy with still on the financial side. I manage my own retirement funds and also my mother's, and it can keep you surprisingly busy. So I haven't gotten totally rusty on finance. And also I'm active in the Genealogy Society, which is probably in many ways as a hobby. Well, one, it's just a job. You just don't get paid for it. I'm vice president of the local Genealogy Society, but as a hobby, it very much fits within what I found I'm really good at, which is analysis and puzzle solving and hunting through data to come to conclusions and figure things out. But like everyone else, my experience studying, in my case in Durham, which sadly is no longer in the IES list. Durham's up in the north of England. I was there for a whole year. I went mostly because I wanted to travel and see new places, and that hasn't changed. I'm feeling a little frustrated right now, like all the rest of you. I'm sure my passport is gathering dust. But I went and I immediately sort of changed what I was looking for. I really like as everyone, meeting new people, hearing new ideas, seeing new places, seeing that there's lots of right ways that you can get the same thing done. And I came out of it completely changing what I had in mind. So I looked at it and said, what I want to do is I'd like a job. I want somebody to pay me to travel. So what skills do I have that I can trade that for? And I changed what I did. I came back from my wonderful year in Durham and finished my degree in political science at the University of Missouri and applied to business school. I had been thinking about being a Supreme Court judge, the first woman. I would have been beaten to it, but, or using maybe law for traveling, hence the poli-sci degree. But I wanted to be there before I was 30, and I didn't think that would cut it. So I looked at business. I'm good with numbers. I don't really like selling things. So maybe marketing wasn't me. I got an MBA from the Wharton School in Finance and Multinational Enterprise, and it opened up great job hunting opportunities. Companies came there at the time to interview us. You know, you just had to put your name on the list. I got a job at Continental Bank in Chicago. It was at the time the 6th largest bank in the US because it offered me an opportunity. I accepted that one because it offered me an opportunity to work overseas as well as domestically. The bank was in 30 countries and went through the training program and went overseas and started that string of careers, first in banking. And then I finished up at Moody's Investor Services, still doing credit analysis, which I discovered I was really good at. And along the way, I've done a lot of things. Some of them, and I think advice to people as you think about it, if you've been abroad with IES, I bet there's one financial lesson we all learned was managing foreign exchange. And understanding that your money can change what it's worth from day to day, depending on which currency it's in, it goes up or down. I wrote the policy for Continental Bank several years later on managing market and trading risk on not just foreign exchange, but derivatives, all kinds of exotic derivatives. And some of that basic understanding started when I was in Durham. So that's my background, and back to Kyle to get started with the topics.
Wonderful. And I'm going to also play timekeeper here. So I'm going to try and keep things moving forward. A couple of just rules of the road here, not many rules at all. We want to keep this as fluid and easy as possible. Any questions anybody has from the group, feel free to just plop them into the chat. We'll open this up for Q&A at the end as well, but all of us are more than happy just to see what pops up on chat and go that way. The way I was thinking about this, and there was a pre-survey that was done to potential attendees, and one of the big questions was, what do you want us to talk about? And I think the big thing that came up for the most part was career progression, jobs. As it's been alluded and everybody knows, this is a very strange market, strange economy. I think what we'll do is spend some time talking about career and job progression as it relates to international opportunities. I think it'll be fun to kind of look back at the IES experience and what skill sets that helped give to us. This has been a fun kind of week to think about all of these things and to go back. I was realizing back in '98 for myself in Vienna, I hadn't cut my hair for about 8 months and I was broke. So I feel like I've really come full circle here in 2020, now starting to be more of getting into writing. So it's kind of back to my long hair days. But let me open it up to the panel here. And the first question I'll just aim towards, actually, I'll start with Greg, if that's okay. Greg, you're with a large organization. You're involved in a number of hiring decisions. What is it that you're looking for in roles that have some type of international components? Can you talk a little bit about, what's the market looking like that you're seeing, and what are the skill sets that you're particularly interested in when you're talking to people as they apply into the organization?
Sure, thanks for the question. So maybe there's two things that I can share. The first is that, and I think this goes back to all of us having a shared experience with IES, is, as somebody who interviews a lot of people and tries to figure out what's the best fit in the organization, whether it's here or other places around the world, the first thing that's really important is that you're interesting. So what does it mean to be interesting? So it means that you can share experiences and stories about the life that you've had and the context that you've had it. So that's not something that actually you can train yourself for. It's just by living an experience. It's by going and putting yourself out there. It's going overseas. Maybe it's doing weird, odd jobs. It doesn't necessarily have to be a linear experience to get to where you are. And I think you've just heard a litany of explanations of how we've all gotten to where we are. It's not a A plus B plus C experience. So I think that is important for everyone who's trying to do something different, is try to make sure you understand how to tell your story so that the person that's listening to you resonates with that story and grabs onto it. And I would say the second thing is, not everybody in the world wants to put themselves out there and work abroad. I think Brynn is a great example on this panel of somebody who just took risk and decided to not probably ask a million questions about what was going to come next, and just try to take the risk and go and do it. And probably all of us who have had that experience of working overseas have done that, which is somebody offered you an opportunity and you said, rather than what is it, just when do we go? And so I think you have to have courage to take risk. And so I would say those two things are quite important now. Of course, you have to understand that when someone's interviewing you, they're weighing you up against other people. So what is your competitive advantage? But in fact, courage and your experience and storytelling about your background can be your competitive advantage when you're looking for a role overseas.
No, I think those are two really good points. I particularly focus on the storytelling piece and trying to help people figure out what their story is, because there was some quote which said that, one of the tragedies is that everybody's got a good story, but most people don't know how to tell it. And I think the first step is to go back to the IES piece here. If you've been through that program, you've been through something, you've learned a lot, and it sometimes is worth rethinking about that. Even the small things, these small little moments that could even be goofy, they actually have very, they end up creating potentially, more insights than you might imagine. And I think that the people that are really good storytellers are the people that are able to find those small little nuggets and turn that into a story that entertains. To jump into quickly, what got me here in Asia back in 2005, 2006 was I started telling my US clients that we could do, it was a marketing agency, and I just started telling US clients, we could do this in Asia too, because I was I wanted to travel to Asia more. And I jumped way ahead of myself, and I just started kind of, quite frankly, bluffing a little bit, saying, yeah, look, we could do this in Asia. And because the momentum in the market was such that it was moving towards Asia anyway, a bunch of clients said, yeah, okay, if you can do it, we're in. And I found myself with a bunch of signed contracts on the other side of the planet, having no idea how the hell I was going to do it. And so it was a one-way trip ticket. And 15 years later, I'm still here. So I'd be curious to hear if other panelists, maybe Faye, based on your experience dealing with innovation, I'm not sure that counts as innovation or not, but what's been your experience with this in terms of thinking about how do you hire? What is it that you're looking for? Maybe you could kind of talk a little bit more in detail from that?
Yeah, I look for kind of the individual. Are they willing to embrace change? Are they agile? Do they love learning? It's kind of that growth mindset that people say. And because in innovation and advanced technology, there's always the latest thing, the new trend. So that love of learning, that curiosity, as we see things are changing so rapidly. And so how can they change with the times on that? And we've kind of seen like from the World Economic Forum too, these skills for the future, you're likely going to be needing to upskill yourself every 5 years. Before it was college one and done, and going to be some grad school, but now it's like every 5 years, how are you increasing your skill set and learning? So I'm always looking for that kind of curiosity and learning so that they can kind of roll with what's happening and what are the latest innovation trends.
I've been half joking that they should open up an agile learning degree. And I also kind of half joke that it's kind of what liberal arts is supposed to be. But I wonder if we could tweak that and put that into a 21st century agile degree somehow. And maybe, you know, to your point, that's something that people have to do every couple of years, whether it's in module based or some other form. I think that the education industry is in for some massive change in the coming months and years. Question for Debbie, actually. You know, you've got gobs of experience in a number of different areas. If you had bits of advice for somebody trying to get started, or somebody who's saying, look, you know, I really want to do something overseas, but I'm not quite sure what it is, or you know, I want to get to that next level. Any thoughts from your side based on your experience?
Okay, a few. I was lucky, well, and probably necessary. I mean, I did seek this out. I was not an accidental business nomad. And given that I started, I mean, I graduated in the late 70s from even grad school. As a woman, you had to be deliberate about it because no one was just going to offer it to you. And so that's really one of my first advice, whether you're at the beginning, and then I can suggest some of the things I did that worked, or further on. But even if you're halfway through your career, if you want an overseas assignment and the business you're working in has them, ask for one. Before you do, you might want to do the same thing anyone should do if you're still in school, and what I did was assess your careers. What am I good at that somebody wants? For me, it was an ability to work with numbers, a willingness and interest in traveling. And in fact, I mean, managing in complexity, which is something we're all doing, or even crises, working internationally is, if you enjoy that, and that's some of the things a lot of us enjoy, is the complexity of living in a foreign country that we've discovered in IES. That's a very useful skill, working internationally, or working anywhere for that matter.
Right.
Some of the most fun times were responding to crises because, one, you got more authority to make decisions, and you had to move quickly, and you were allowed to. But so first, figure out what you're good at, supplement it. That's why I got an MBA. Okay, I'm kind of good at numbers, but the only people who wanted to hire me with a poli-sci degree was the IRS, because few people who took the civil service exam could add. At least that was my read on it. And that was not the career I was looking for. So first, work on that. If you're looking, then ask. When I was assigned, we were trained. When I went through, we joined a bank, and big banks, there was a training program. There's still short training programs, but there was a 7-month training program, partly assignments, rotations, and partly classroom. And you were sort of ranked by when you got out. I joined the Asia Pacific division. The first overseas slot that opened up was in Japan, and I didn't get it. Someone junior to me got it. That was okay. He spoke Japanese and I didn't. The second one that opened up was in Taipei, and another guy went out, and I didn't get it. He didn't speak Chinese. Neither did I. A few words, but that was it. And I was a good, 9 months senior to him in the rankings and the waiting list. Starting then, once a month, I went in to the head of the Asia Pacific division in Chicago and asked about upcoming openings. It got to be a bit of a joke between us, fortunately. Don't whine, don't borderline nagging. When Singapore came up next, I got it.
Right. Right.
So partly for a woman, they were being protective too. Oh, this is too hard or it's too difficult. On that topic, I'll say, if you're thinking anything is too difficult, I still probably wouldn't jump at Saudi Arabia, to tell you, I'm not really interested. Later, when I visited Japan and did business in Japan, I never lived there. It didn't matter that I was a woman. To the Japanese, being foreign is a big deal. What sex you are after that doesn't matter. Also, I found it was an advantage once I got to Singapore. There were precisely in 1981, 3 women bankers of the 200 foreign banks that were operating in Singapore.
Wow. And
everybody knew who we were. You don't even have to be good at marketing. They know who you are. If your customers know who you are, there's a better chance they're going to call you.
Yep. So persistence and the power of networking, I suppose, are two lessons on this one. I've got a question for Brynn, because I think you're coming at this from a very different angle, which is, again, why I love the diversity of this panel. A couple questions, maybe all intertwined, but how did you end up getting into what you've done right now? Because I think it's very much, it's very recent. And what other things are you all working on? Because I know that you're involved in some things that might be of interest to people who are listening in terms of, potentially opportunities to get over to Amsterdam.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So my trajectory in coming here and arriving here is a bit long. I'll try to give you the shortened version, but I actually came here. Something amazing about the Netherlands is you can come here on a tourist visa and you have 90 days. And if in those 90 days you submit an application for a visa, then once that visa is in process, you're granted the decision period to stay. So even those 90 days, and while they're deciding on your visa, you're allowed to stay here without having a visa. And that's a huge advantage. I think it's different under COVID circumstances. I'm not sure what the borders are looking like for American citizens now on a tourist visa, but it was a huge advantage to be able to be here, because you need to, there's all these administrative steps and bureaucratic steps that involve having an address here or a bank account. So I came here and I did one visa route in the beginning, which I won't go into because it was very context specific, but I discovered that there's something called the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty, which is literally just a door to American citizens to come to the Netherlands and establish a business or bring a business here. It's, as far as I know, it's 100% approval rate. So it's not a risky visa to apply for. If you have a business idea and you have a little bit of capital, you're in, and you pay your taxes, then they're happy. You can operate multiple business activities at once. So when I came here and I was thinking, oh my God, I need to be an entrepreneur to stay. I just graduated college. I don't know what it means to be an entrepreneur. Really, entrepreneur is an intimidating word. And I just became a freelancer. So I work freelance for this organization. I also work freelance for a couple of other companies doing some weekend projects, and I'm a dog sitter, because one of the really nice things about becoming a freelancer is if you have an interest that aligns with a need in the market, and here there's this huge need for dog sitters specifically because there are so many expats with dogs who like an English-speaking dog sitter. There's just vast opportunity. And if you're willing to just put yourself out there, I just went to the park and I told people I'm a dog sitter and I built myself a dog sitting business. It was really that easy. If there's anybody who's interested in a potential move to Europe, I would really recommend looking into the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty. It's an incredibly advantageous way in, and it's only for Americans and Japanese citizens. I think it was established in the 50s after the Americans helped the Dutch in World War II. Typically, if you want to be an entrepreneur in Europe, you have to put in about 30,000 capital, but this is less than 5,000 euros capital and a business idea, and you're in. So I can really recommend it. The Netherlands is an amazing place to live. As far as getting into the organization that I'm working for, that was largely networking. And that networking did happen through IES. So because I had studied the field that I wanted to go into, I just reached out to the professors that I had during my semester abroad. I explained the kind of work that I wanted to do. And I said, is there anybody you can connect me with who might have leads? And someone connected me to someone, and I ended up in this organization. So I really can't stress enough the power of networking. If you're willing to, again, just tell your story to someone, yeah, it can really bring you places.
My experience here and around is that there's a pretty tight expat community wherever you go, and people are usually more likely to help each other out than in normal situations, or what you might be used to back, say, in Minnesota.
Yeah.
I went to a small school in Maine, and we've got our alumni group here, and in fact, I just got an email from a student yesterday asking for advice, and you know, I connected him to 2 people, and I might actually use him for an internship as well. And to, I think, to Debbie's point and to everybody's point, like, you've got to put yourself out there, you've got to ask. But I think that it's pleasantly surprising to find out how open these groups are. When I started this process back in 2005, 2006 to come over to Asia, I was blindly reaching out to people in Singapore on LinkedIn, which was a brand new platform, and I was getting meetings from it. So, you know, you do have to step out of your comfort zone, and I think that the power of networking is not to be underestimated.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And if I could also say that Facebook is an incredibly valuable tool, because there are these expat communities have created Facebook pages to discuss exactly the questions we have when we want to move abroad. You know, how long does it take before I get this letter from the immigration department? Or, you know, what's the best place to start looking for an apartment? So even before you move here, there are a lot of people who jump into those Facebook groups and ask their questions. And I think connecting to people who have already done it is incredibly valuable, because there's so much information out there that's not curated. It can be very hard to do your own research. So to speak with people who have done some research and heard from others is incredibly teaching.
So I'm also just going to ask everybody who's participating or listening in today, if there are specific topics, if there's specific areas that you have some questions, I would ask throughout, because we, you know, this whole topic of global work, of thinking about career advancement, of global communication. I mean, it's so big and vague. We can go in a number of directions. So if there are particular interesting directions people would like, feel free to speak up. And I think that brings me to the next section that I wanted to talk about, which was the topic of communication and some of the challenges and sometimes goofy experiences. I think everybody's had that culture clash moment, good, bad, and ugly, where there's been a communication breakdown. A lot of what I wrote about was that, because I was experiencing myself, and with companies of all sizes, just how much money could be lost from sometimes a misunderstood statement, an email that gets misinterpreted the wrong way. All of these things happen in a domestic environment all the time. I think the potential for misunderstanding at an international level gets multiplied just because of all of the different moving pieces and the different working styles. So I'd ask a question. I'll go out to, I guess, Greg first. You focus on inclusivity as one piece of this, and I know that term came up in the pre-event surveys as well. Could you talk a little bit about the inclusivity that you're involved in? How does that work on an international, on a global level versus regional?
It's not always easy, that's for sure. So I maybe I can give you my experience of leaving the US and going to France. And I actually had learned French in school, but I didn't learn it. I learned it to take tests, not to speak it. And so I spent actually the first 4 months of my experience in France being in an immersive environment, which meant actually I was just in an exhaustion state all the time of people trying to tell you in French what you were trying to digest in English. So one of the things that I learned from that experience, and actually has helped me through moving to Hong Kong and Shanghai and then coming back to Hong Kong, is that we take for granted the way people understand us. And when you're in an environment where you're, as I was, when I went to France, I spoke one language well, which was English. And when I left France, I spoke too poorly. So I spoke English worse because I had stopped using it as much, and I had picked up a little bit of French. But it went beyond the language, which is about trying to include people in discussions. And I think Kyle exhibits this behavior very well, trying to continue to ask, do people have questions? Do you have anything you want to add? That's super important when you're dealing across cultures, to stop, be mindful, include people in conversations, because not all of the world does speak English as well as most of us probably do. And when people are included, they can bring their full self to work. And I was talking with somebody about this tonight at dinner, who's a French Vietnamese. And he was saying very much that, where he first came to work in Hong Kong and he really felt like he couldn't be who he was. And so inclusion is important, because if you, all of this, amazing talent in this virtual room, go to work somewhere across the world, and you can't be part of the team fully, you can't be yourself, then it's not very useful for a company or an organization to have you in the organization. So inclusion is just as important as showing up at the party. You have to be part of the heart of the dance.
And I'm going to ask a variation of I guess this question, or what you were talking about, to the rest of the group here. I'll start with Debbie, but is there one bit of advice that you would give to somebody? You've worked in a number of parts of the world. I assume you spent a lot of time in Antarctica based on the 6 continents.
No penguins.
No penguin communication.
No penguin communication skills, no.
What would be one big communication lesson that you would share with people who are just starting out? And let me give maybe a quick back thought here. Because in 2020, none of us are getting on airplanes, or very few of us are, oftentimes we're able to show up to a place and kind of muddle through this. A lot of the work that's happening now is still international and global, but it's virtual, and it's more difficult to pick this stuff up. So if you had to help somebody fast track their knowledge about communicating across cultures, what bits of advice would you give? And I'm going to ask the same question to the rest of the panelists after Debbie.
You've covered some of it. It's important when you've got somebody sitting at the table or on your screen who's being silent, ask them. Ask them for input. It may be that they don't have anything new to say. It may be it's awkward for them. Give them time to express themselves. They may not be comfortable in English, which everywhere I've worked, that was, even when I was working for the Swiss, that was the language in the office. We were in London. But and when you can, this is a difficulty with dealing virtually. And you mentioned in your book, whatever is the way you get social with some of your colleagues or even your customers, but particularly with your colleagues, if it's lunch, if it's drinks after work, do that. People are more relaxed and looser, and which it is varies by culture. I agree about Singapore. Kyle's book, it's lunch in Singapore.
That's right.
Or anything that involves food.
Yes.
In London, it's drinks.
And it's really interesting. This sounds so simple, but I'll pick on the Brits for a second. British companies come over here and they try to hire and build teams in Singapore. So what do? They say, okay, let's cut out early and go have some drinks at the bar. What ends up happening is and I'm just picking on Brits. We can insert tons of examples here, but the Brits end up staying at the bar, and the locals quietly go back to the office and go back to work, and
or go home to their families.
Yeah, and then and then they go back to their families. And what you end up with very quickly is this silos that happen incredibly quickly, and that's the opposite of inclusion that Greg was just talking about. And there's a lack of oftentimes awareness. Like, well, we keep inviting these guys out for drinks, but they're not doing it. And one of the arguments I was making is, look, it's a lunch culture, and go spend some time at lunch, and that it's up to you to do that adjustment. The place that you move to is not going to adjust to you, right?
I'll also give you another example from my Moody's. So by now I'm into the 21st century. I'm working in Singapore again. And they send a team out from head office. Our office in Singapore, I mean, Singapore is a sort of multicultural country to start with, although dominantly by ethnic Chinese.
Yep.
But there's the Malays and the Tamils and the miscellaneous mixed race and Europeans and whatever, and lots of expats of all kinds of nationalities. And our office reflected that. I mean, we spoke English. It was an American company. But we had different kinds of internationals and all kinds of Singaporeans and also people from Southeast Asia. We're having, from head office, here comes the inclusion event. And we all knew in New York, that's code for usually race relations. Maybe it's code for discrimination on race or sex usually. Mm-hmm. And so they come out, the HR people come out, and we are, sitting around the conference table trying to be quiet as one of the senior people. and they're asking questions. And I'm kind of hoping we're not going to find out we're doing a lousy job of it, because I thought we got along pretty well. And they didn't have any problems on the whole discrimination thing. And the word they used was inclusion. And they said, you exclude us from global meetings because of our time zone. You forget, we will stay up. If we have to get on a conference call at 10 p.m. at night when it's 10 a.m. in New York, we'll do it. We understand that our time zone does not, they just, the only way you can get global overlap is Asia is in the evening. Because otherwise it's the middle of the wee hours of the morning in Europe. So and I had lots of global meetings for what I did. It was like, as one of my colleagues is like, it's your evening glass of wine in Asia. It's past dinner time. It's lunch in London, and it's morning coffee in New York. That's rough on people who are in San Francisco.
Yeah,
they really need their coffee. So don't forget, particularly as we're dealing virtually, that your people, don't assume they're not willing to adjust and work some crazy hours. Let them sleep sometime. I mean, my rule in my office for people who work for me in Singapore was, if you've been up the night before on a global conference call, don't set the alarm, sleep until you wake up, unless you got a meeting with clients or something else, and then set the alarm and you got to be here, Yep. But, you need to be flexible like that, because there's electronically, there's exclusion too.
Absolutely. Faye, same question, just in terms of any communication lessons learned that you've picked up along the way that you think would help people in this group?
No, as people were saying, it's just really understanding that. I just kind of share a story. I was preparing to go to Japan. And from that, and just learning like the little nuances of them nodding their head does not mean yes. It means I heard you. And I'm like, oh, okay. That it's just some of the interesting things. And then, of course, then I did all this research and kind of practice of like, how deep do you bow? It depends on how executive the person you are. And so I learned all this protocol. And then when I got there to the company, they were all expat executives. And I'm like, what?
I did all this research for nothing.
But it's always good to learn.
That's right.
But yes, from that standpoint, it's that protocol, the nuances. They're very small, and kind of observing them, talking to people that are just as we are here, right? Talking to people that experience there, they're culturally from that. You might have friends. I talked to friends that were Japanese, and just kind of learning the little nuances of that. So just definitely recommend.
You mean the never saying no part?
Yes, never saying no.
They don't say no. They may hate the idea. They have no intention of going along with it, but they don't say no. When you start seeing them weaseling around it, that's no.
That's a no.
Exactly.
There's so many stories.
It's not polite. They don't do it, Yeah.
There's so many expensive examples of that going wrong. One of the things that I uncovered a couple of years ago was we're not the only ones going through this, and there's actually an entire genre of research. There's data and research that's been going on in modern times since World War II that has looked, studied, and tried to measure some of these invisible communication style differences. So we just were talking about, direct communication versus indirect. They're measured how people build trust in different parts of the world, how we give feedback, how we handle confrontation, how we deal with time sensitivity. Because I was in Vienna, I'm looking at my watch right now. We got 5 minutes left, people. I know this, my Viennese experience. The cool stuff is, though, that this data has been out there, and it's now being visualized in some pretty interesting ways. This was one of my big takeaways. I don't visually get into it in the book, but I allude to some of the ability to use some of this cross-cultural data that basically is a great starting point to get a understanding of a different market or a different region, to be able to start, okay, if I can measure what this difference is between my style and the style that I'm now working with, if I can measure that, I can then start thinking about ways to managing it. And that's really what I've started building a consulting business around, which is especially for people that aren't just dealing with just Japan, but maybe they're dealing with 10 countries a day, like I am. There is a question that came up about, because we talked a lot about Asia, we talked a lot about Europe. Is anybody in the panel have any indirect or direct experience in Africa, or I think it was, where was it, Central America?
I mean, I've been to South Africa, but I must say our office was only once, fairly briefly. So a little bit more hesitancy in the communication, but it wasn't that obvious, and they were accustomed to working with Americans, the ones I met. And I did meet businesses there while I was there. But again, I think they were, and they've had the Dutch and the British, and probably find Americans a bit of a breath of fresh air sometimes. That can help, but probably not anymore. Central America, I've done South America. My father, by the way, was born and raised in Guyana. Well, it was British then, but, and I have been to, for business and stuff, Central America, Mexico, but Central America and Mexico, I have to say, I've been on holiday. I've been scuba diving in Central America. There are some differences.
Sorry,
and there are books.
The books are helpful. In fact, one of the books that came up in the chat as you were talking was Culture Map by Erin Meyer. It's actually not her data. She's just very good at visualizing and putting some visualizations to it. And I was very influenced by her book and her work to do this book. So that's a good recommendation that somebody dropped in the chat. Let's flip it now to open this up to the Q&A. And is Jody, are you handling this, or is this Jennifer's piece?
I believe that Jennifer is going to take it.
Jennifer, do you mind if I hand this over to you to do the Q&A section?
You bet. You bet. Thanks so much to everyone. What a great conversation. Wonderful, wonderful information shared today. Looking at the questions, I think, did anybody else have anything to add to working in Central America, South America, healthcare? There was one question about that. No.
I can
messaging Crystal, because I can maybe make a connection with somebody who works at the CDC who's a friend of mine. So I'll handle that offline.
Yeah, I can connect with her as well. My husband's from Brazil, and I've worked in healthcare as well. So happy to make a connection from that standpoint. So
good, and I know of a few other alums who have worked in those areas. So we'll connect you on that, Crystal. So I've got another question from Mary Elizabeth. Is it Culture Map or Culture Code? I've read the Culture Code.
The Culture Code is yeah, so it's the Culture Map is what was originally referred to, and that's by Professor Erin Meyer, and she was at INSEAD. And that's what I was alluding to earlier. The Culture Code, there's actually two Culture Code books. The one that I read was about he's the French guy who does advertising, and he looks at various responses to how they build advertisements in different parts of the world based on some of the cultural background. Both are really good books. I think they're great. I recommend both of them.
I'd also say there's a whole series of books that include the words culture shock in the title, and they tend to be country specific. And they can help you with the avoiding some faux pas.
Yep.
How to exchange business cards in Muslim countries. How to, what in Singapore, what to wear when you get invited to someone's wedding and what the appropriate gift is.
Great. We had another question about sharing emails, and hopefully everybody's on the panel is willing to share your email. We can send that to everyone who participated today and then after the session is over. I'm not seeing any other questions. Kyle, did you have any closing remarks or just a thought about how is globalization accelerating?
I think globalization is evolving and adapting. I think it is accelerating in a digital way. The traditional way that people think about globalization is usually the ships with the giant shipping containers in them, and those numbers have not been increasing. Supply chains have been getting more local and regionalized, and I think in some cases mindsets have, which is not a good thing. In other cases, we're having this conversation now at the click of a button. It's been astoundingly easy to have conversations around the globe. The digital globe is closer together than it ever has been before. Companies, when they start up now, are born global. So I think that globalization is definitely going to take a different path than what we probably grew up thinking about it. It's certainly a complicated topic. It's not all puppy dogs and ice cream. There's a lot of downside to this, and there's a lot of challenges because there's no one person or entity that's in control and that can steer this thing. So, it's complicated, but I think it's fun, and especially in the startup world for people that are either solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, contractors, as Brynn has been involved, and then she got into more of a full-time thing. I think that there's just tons of opportunities in the coming months and years based on all of this rapid change. It's about that innovation. It's about just going for it, as everybody on the panel has alluded to here today.
Absolutely. Jody, did you want to close the session?
Sure, I'd like to wrap things up. First of all, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and giving us the benefit of your experiences and sharing with us some good advice for our future careers or just our career paths. We so appreciate that. Once again, when we bring our alumni together, even in the virtual forum, it's just an enriched moment because everyone really has so much to contribute. There are so many themes that connect us as far as we are always interested in continuing our learning. We are working to maintain our agility, and we want to be able to be abroad and resume our travel, and we all share those sentiments. I will say we do have a number of students that are hoping to travel abroad with IES Abroad in the coming semesters once the world reopens for study abroad. Many of these students are going to need scholarships to be able to study abroad because of the impact of the economy and COVID-19. So we are so thrilled to be able to bring our alumni together and to reconnect them to their experience. And we're also thrilled to be able to help our future students be able to also have a study abroad experience and have their lives enriched by that. So we welcome your contributions to future scholarships, and we so thank you again for your time today.
Thank you.
you again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Best wishes for a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks very
Bye.
much.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night from Asia.
Good night, good morning, good afternoon.
Thank you.